animations as good as the marketing presentation on this one?
What's that?
You gonna have animations as good as the marketing presentation? The presentation
I don't have any 3D stuff on it, but I did have some stuff. I like having tidbits in there.
Huh?
I like having tidbits in there. So
I'm sure he'll love it. His mind would be blown if he had a spinner do on it.
Scrunch, the main presentation. No worries.
No, dude, just read off of that on presentation.
I will absolutely do.
Alright, so we're good.
Thank you.
Alright, so we're K6, presentation on chi-squared. I'm Hong, he's John. I'm writing my full name. Anyway, so the case scenario is that we are a global sports management company, and we have FIFA as our client. And they want us to give them a recommendation on which two countries out of 4 will respond best to a new social media marketing promotion that they want to put out. The problem statement is that they are unsure pretty much about which countries to select because they want to generate the most response in those countries. And this is the main problem statement: which 2 countries out of 4 should FIFA use the social media marketing promotion on? The purpose of the study, again, is to determine the percentages of adults that use social networking sites from 4 different countries to know which 2 countries will respond best to this new social media promotion. So basically what we did was to survey the adults in 4 countries, namely Great Britain, Israel, Russia, and the United States. And the percentage of adults, basically we just gathered the data and then you could find out the percentages from there. Understanding the data would allow FIFA to use the social media platforms in the 2 countries that would generate the most percentage of people and in turn give them the most awareness, and from that awareness they can also generate revenue. So the research question is, are the percentages of adults that use social media in the 4 countries the same? So our null hypothesis is that all 4 of the countries, yes, they have the same percentage of adults that use social media. And on the flip side, the alternate hypothesis is that the 4 countries do not have the same percentage of adults that use social media, which means that at least one of them is different. So for our methodology of how to solve this problem, we first have to develop the null, which we already done. We have to do this at a 95% confidence level. So our significance level is at 0.05. Then using the survey data, we have to find the critical value. That will all be shown later by John. Then we have to find the test statistic and compare it to critical value, or we can use an Excel formula and find the p-value. We will be going over both ways of how to do it. And then finally we draw conclusions from our findings. And for this, we will be using a chi-square test to test the equality of multiple proportions, because there are 4 different countries, and also we're not really trying to find like a goodness of fit where we're trying to see whether it's one line or whatever. We're just trying to find whether they're the same or not the same in terms of percentage.
All right, so our findings using the critical value method. To find critical value, we need to find degrees of freedom and level of significance. The degrees of freedom are found by multiplying the number of rows -1 by the number of columns -1. For example, here's our observed data. You'll take the 4 in the rows, 2 columns, obviously 4 minus 1, 2 minus 1, 3. That's our degree of freedom. This does not, however, include the total row. So, moving on, to find with our degrees of freedom of 3 and our level of significance being 0.05, we use the chi-square distribution table, which is in our book on 955, if any of you guys have the book. In order to find it, we go across 3, 0.05, we find it right there, 7.815, and that's our critical value. with our critical value at the 7.815, our diagram will look something like this. So, if our test statistic is higher than our critical value, we reject the null hypothesis, and if it's smaller than the critical value, we accept the null hypothesis. And then our next step is to find the test statistic, and we use the following formula. The sum of observed minus expected squared over expected. And then to find the expected values, we use this formula, which is obviously the total value of the row, total value of the column multiplied, and then divided by the total sample size. And then with that formula, we use those same data. Go. So that we take the total, and the sample. So for the expected of yes for Great Britain specifically will be 376. And then you will repeat that for every single country, both yes and no. And then when you do find all of that information after all of the calculations, the table should look something like this. Expected values. We then plug in the values into the test statistic formula. And then what you'll do is you'll take, okay, so when you find, using the formula, 2.77. Okay, so you take the value of the observed data table with the corresponding value of the expected value table. You then subtract from the expected value, subtract the expected value from the observed data value, square the difference, and then divide by the expected value. You do the same thing for every corresponding value in the tables, and then you add up all the answers to get our test statistic. I almost got it. All right. This is what it'll look like after you do all the calculations, and then at the end.
And on the exam, they actually went above and beyond here. I kind of intended for you just to guess, but that's okay. You could just work on yes and get the expected minus the observed yeses. So that's what you'll get on the exam. This is a little more complex. I'll go over an example on what you'll see on the exam.
And this is our test statistic.
Good job. Well done.
Just in case we don't have Excel.
All right. After comparing it with the critical value, we can conclude that the test statistic is in the reject zone, right there. And since it is in the reject zone, we will reject the null that all 4 countries have the same percentage of adults that use social media, and then accept the alternate hypothesis that at least one is different.
So now is the p-value method really simple.
This one,
You basically input the observed data table and the expected value table onto Excel. Use the formula chi-square test. You then highlight the cells for the observed data first, followed by a comma, and then you highlight the cells for the expected values table. You press enter, you get your p-value. And then the p-value is less than 0.05, so we reject the null hypothesis.
No, you're close.
All right. So, because of our findings, after we looked at the observed data table, the 2 countries with the highest percentage of adults that use social media are Israel and the US, 53 and 50% respectively. FIFA should use social media, especially in those 2 countries. However, FIFA might want to consider factoring the total population of the people as well, because lower percentages in one country could still be more than other countries. So say a lower percentage in China could still be more than the tiny country of the Vatican City.
It is 10 minutes.
I didn't hear you. You're right, it is really hard to hear up here from the back row.
You're right. Israel is not, isn't it very populous, so.
Right.
Compared to China, it would be a huge difference.
Of course. And FIFA could also try to find other forms of marketing to reach other countries where social media isn't used as much, like the United States. Any questions?
These are all really strong presentations. Okay, let's, including the ones that were before this as well. I mean, there's not a clunker in the bunch. That's awesome.